Kimberly Clinch here. It's 8 p.m. in Boston, which means it's time to leap off the starting blocks. Welcome to the February National Call of American Promise. Again, my name is Kimberly Clinch, and I am a Citizen Empowerment Coordinator here at American Promise. We are a network of citizens from all walks of life, from across the country and across the political spectrum, united by our conviction that every American, regardless of their wealth, deserves a voice in our government, an equal voice in our government. And to that end, we advance a U.S. constitutional amendment that will distinguish money from speech and corporations from people, so we the people can set limits on big money in politics. A big thank you to everyone who is tuning in live or listening to the recording of this call, the February 2020 gathering of our national network. In government of, by, and for the people, the order matters. Government for the people follows government of and by the people. So again, to all of you who are making time to amend our Constitution and join tonight's call to take part in our government, thank you. Tonight, we will review the progress of our work since January's call, hear from a Michigan advocate about their state lobby day, and discuss this month's suggested action, a letter to the editor to amplify the milestone our amendment movement reached last Thursday, which was the hearing in the House Judiciary Committee. And we will get an inside look at that hearing from tonight's guest speaker, U.S. Representative Ted Deutsch of Florida's 22nd District. Here to introduce Representative Deutsch is our very own Azer Cole, State Manager of American Promise.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you everyone for tuning into the call. It's always a pleasure to be on these, and I'm honored to introduce Congressman Deutsch, who is an absolute champion for this amendment. He's the lead sponsor of House Joint Resolution 2 and an articulate advocate for why we need to get big money out of politics, who I was honored to witness in person last week in Washington, D.C., testify before the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee. As you all grow this movement, more and more members of Congress are hopping on. But Representative Deutsch has been with us from the get-go and continues to be with us in winning over others. Congressman Deutsch represents Florida's 22nd district, and throughout his 6 congressional terms has time and time again modeled what it means to serve the public as the founders intended. He's the chairman of the House Ethics Committee and senior member of both the House Judiciary Committee and House Foreign Affairs Committee. Some of you will remember Congressman Deutsch from the National Citizen Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. in 2018, where he joined Parkland High School students Noah, Angelina, and Dimitri to highlight the insidious connection between gun violence in schools and outsized lobbying power emboldened by the Supreme Court. It's easy to feel that everything in Congress right now is partisan, but I've been encouraged by Congressman Deutsch's actions and rhetoric around the cross-partisan importance of our amendment. While speaking to the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties Subcommittee, the Congressman highlighted how this isn't an issue solely supported by Democrats, it's one supported by all Americans. To bring our country together, these are the exact truths that we need to highlight more. And Congressman, these are the exact people you're talking with on the call today. Americans who, across the political spectrum, have decided to cast aside many political differences to work on this big foundational project of fixing our Constitution to work for all of us, not only those who can afford it. And just for a little bit of background for anyone not super familiar, there was a hearing in Washington, D.C. last week, and it was in the Judiciary Subcommittee. American Promise was one of a handful of groups asked to actively participate and testify alongside People for the American Way, Public Citizen, and a couple of others. And Congressman Deutsch, alongside Chairman Cohen, a Democrat from Tennessee, held a press conference before the hearing. Members of the organizations were able to say why this issue is an important one for them, and the two congressmen articulated why it's so vital for the two of them as well before walking over all together as a group to the Congressional Subcommittee hearing room, where they gave expert witness Congressman Deutsch, one of the lead sponsors of House Joint Resolution 2, who was then followed by 4 expert witnesses, 3 for the majority, the Democrats in the committee in this case, and 1 for the minority. The 3 majority witnesses were Rob Weissman, president of Public Citizen, Owen Weintraub, a former FEC commissioner, and Professor Chara Torres Spilisi, who's a constitutional scholar, the one person who was not in favor of the Democracy for All Amendment, HJR2, or any of the other various 28th Amendment proposals, was Bradley Smith, who is the executive director of the Institute for Free Speech, which is sort of a free market libertarian think tank that talks about how this is a dangerous slope if we decide what's speech and what isn't. Some of you might remember him from the Constitution Center in Philadelphia when he debated Jeff Clement's American Promise president just a year ago or so. I think we did a poll of the crowd in that room that very night, and I think 79 to 21% of people thought that it actually made sense to have this constitutional amendment. These people weren't convinced, like the majority of Americans, that money was not in fact free speech and corporations should in fact have the same rights as people. And so, Congressman, I'm just thrilled to turn it over to you. You're talking to Americans all across the country, from Maine to Michigan to Memphis to Seattle, who are working on this day in and day out. And as you're speaking, everyone, please be thinking of questions for the Congressman. You can go ahead and press 1 on your keypad to raise your hand, and Kimberly will guide us in some Q&A afterwards. And with that, Congressman Deutsch, a big thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thanks. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, coming through loud and clear.
I'm going to assume that's a yes. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being on, and thanks for the interest and the passion from all parts of the country. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, because what we've been trying to do here over these past 10 years is to deal with this growing and really fundamental problem that was created with the Citizens United decision, and that's the fact that there's this growing sense, this growing lack of faith that so many Americans have in our democracy. It's interesting. Justice Kennedy said that he was convinced that Americans wouldn't lose faith in our faith in our democracy. He made that point. He's repeated that, and he's wrong. The fact is that more and more Americans believe that their elected leaders are putting special interests ahead of them, and that they're doing it because of the billions of dollars dumped into the political process that elects them. The American people overwhelmingly believe that their representatives aren't representing them, and that the agenda in Washington is being set not by representatives on behalf of the people they represent, but on behalf of the special interests. And if spending money in elections is an exercise in free speech, which is, of course, the argument we've all heard, then the 10 couples who have spent over $1.2 billion since Citizens United in the past 10 years have the same rights as 6 million Americans spending $200. That's the best example of what's wrong with the Citizens United world. The Democracy for All Amendment will overturn Citizens United. It will allow for reasonable limits on election spending. And the reason we need to do that, there are a few reasons. One, look, limiting the amount of money in their elections is necessary to prevent corruption. But it's not just about that. That's central, but there's so much more. It'll protect our elections from foreign interference. It'll help level the playing field so that people from all walks of life can seek elected office. It will force elected officials to focus on the priorities of their constituents all the time instead of having to chase donors. And if we succeed in overturning Citizens United, we'll protect our elections, we'll restore the integrity of our governmental institutions, and we'll take an enormous step forward toward political equality for all Americans. The Democracy for All Amendment it's a message that we're sending that says that your status, and we send this to every American, it's a message that says your status in our democracy shouldn't reflect your status, it shouldn't be dependent upon your status in our economy. It doesn't matter whether you work 3 jobs and you barely get by, or if you own 3 homes and you barely work. Under the eyes of our law and our government and our elections, everyone should be treated equally. So under the Democracy for All Amendment, American politics will become what it's meant to be, what it used to be, what people expect, and frankly, what they look forward to participating in. And that's a vigorous debate of ideas rather than just an onslaught of corrupt spending from the wealthiest individuals and special interests, from super PACs that are created to advance the interests of one company or one person rather than the interests of America as a whole. We had a terrific hearing before the Constitution Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee last week. There is growing momentum. 20 states around the country, over 800 municipalities, counties, municipalities, have now gone on record supporting our efforts to overturn Citizens United, calling for a constitutional amendment. And I'll finish with this before taking questions. I know, we all know that this isn't easy, but this is the remedy that exists for us at this moment. We have the opportunity to amend the United States Constitution to restore people's faith in our democracy. I think that there is nothing more important to do than that. And that's why, again, I'll finish where I started. I'm so grateful to all of you for the role that you're playing in your communities all across the country. And American Promise does such good work making sure this issue remains at the forefront, remains nonpartisan. Getting money out of politics is only a partisan issue under the Capitol Dome. Every place else I go in my district and around the country, Democrats, Republicans, independents alike understand that there is a need for action. That's what you're advocating for. That's what I'm advocating for. And I'm glad to be your partner in this effort. And with that, I will gladly take some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Representative Deutsch. Really appreciate those words of encouragement, and we're grateful for all that you do, and you're joining us here tonight. In a second, I will start calling on people for Q&A. Everyone, that is your cue to start pressing 1 on your keypad if you have a question. And I'll kick things off with a question myself. Representative Deutsch, to help us understand this government that we're trying to take part in and change, I'm wondering if you could give us some insight into how the members of Congress interact with one another. In our work, we hear stories about party leadership dictating how much time politicians have to spend fundraising and whether to support certain bills and the importance of committee positions. And we see that co-sponsorship of the Democracy for All Amendment is almost entirely Democratic, which doesn't represent the wishes of Republican voters, but it also isn't really in the interest of a constitutional amendment that's going to need ratification by red states. So to help us in our work, can you tell us a bit about what's going on behind the scenes, and at a practical level, how do the parties exert influence, and how can those of us on the call crack through that to successfully inspire bipartisan collaboration?
Well, it's a great question, and yeah, part of the corrupting influence of money is the agenda, the issues that drive Congress forward. It's the reason that more than 300 bipartisan bills that passed the House are actually sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. That's a part of it. The other part is there's this constant need to go out and figure out how to have raise the money, to have the resources in order to compete with the super PAC that's going to come in and potentially spend $1 million or $2 million or $5 million in a congressional district. That makes it really challenging. It means, as I said before, it means that members often have, whether they're focused on it all the time or not, there's always this realization that somehow you've got to generate the resources necessary to survive in a Citizens United world, and that takes away necessarily, even if it's just mental energy from time to time, it takes away from the full focus on doing what's necessary on behalf of the American people. The way that you respond is, to point out that this is, I mean, most importantly, to point out that for virtually all of my Republican colleagues who have not signed on, and we have a Republican co-sponsor, and there have been Republicans in the past who have spoken about the importance of this issue. Nearly all have not, and they need to hear from their constituents. They need to hear from people that their state or their county or their city has passed a resolution calling for overturning Citizens United to get big money out of politics. We have 20 states, as I said, who have passed resolutions. We've got to get to 38 states, to a total of 38, in order to move forward. Even if we get through Congress, it starts at the grassroots level. That's why your participation is so important. Go out and meet with your members of Congress. Frankly, you should ask them if they think it's fair to you that they have to spend any of their time worrying about how they're going to compete with all this big money when all of their time should be spent on you, even if they don't agree with all of your politics. I know people on this call have different politics, different views on lots of political issues, but make them understand that it will be better for their constituents, and frankly, it will be better for them if they got on board with an effort that will change the way things work so dramatically that they'll be able to do the things that they got into politics for in the first place to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that insight. And next, we'll take a question from David Stringfellow. David, you're off mute. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question is.
Yes, this is David Stringfellow. I'm in North Texas. I'm out of Richardson, Texas, the suburb of Dallas. And thank you, Representative Deutsch. We're really pleased to be trying to get behind you on this and support you in any way we can. Here in our chapters, our regional chapter of North Texas, we've been talking with many House members, including my House member is Van Taylor out of Texas District 3.
Uh-huh.
They're listening to us. They're asking good questions, but we're having a lot of trouble getting them past. I guess I'll say two things: the fact that they believe the First Amendment might be tainted or might be impacted if we overturn Citizens United, and they're also very strong on federalism, and they say it very clearly. And again, I say they're listening and they're engaging with us, but we just can't seem to get them to really buy into anything that we're saying. I'm wondering if you have any advice for how we engage with someone like Van Taylor, who is a pretty conservative member, but he's also got a constituency here that's quite a mix of politics.
Sure. It's a great question. I know I've gotten to know your area pretty well since one of my kids goes to the University of Texas as we speak, and Van's a new member. He's awfully conservative. He's really thoughtful, though, and I've talked to him about a lot of issues, and I'll tell him that his constituent brought this up on this call. Look, Montana tried to regulate money in politics after Citizens United, and they couldn't. They can't. It doesn't. That's not. The federalism argument, I think, doesn't. It's not a strong argument because it's already been tested, and we clearly, this is clearly not, we're not interfering with anyone's First Amendment rights. The court, when the court ruled on this, the issue of corruption and whether spending all this money is contributes to corruption, that the court in this and subsequent decisions ultimately came down with the position that says if you were to walk into my office with a briefcase full of money and you told me, and you put it on my desk and you told me that I can take that briefcase home with me only if I vote the way that they want me to vote, that would be corruption and that's illegal. But virtually any other way they spend that money to accomplish exactly the same thing is perfectly fine because because money is speech. I've not had this discussion with Van, but I will, because I think he's smart enough to understand, or at least be challenged by the I think obvious and compelling argument that that all of this money has corrupted the process, and that there's not a question of free speech when you allow massive sums of money to diminish the speech of everyone else. And so that's how I respond to those. I'm gonna look for Van on the floor tomorrow, and I mean we've got protections on the First Amendment in our Democracy for All amendment. I mean there are restrictions obviously on all kinds of on the Bill of Rights already, and this is not something that will prevent people from exercising their free speech. To the contrary, it's going to ensure that everyone's First Amendment right is protected, because right now those rights are being threatened by this deluge of money.
Thanks so much, Representative Deutsch. Very cool to see how quickly that talking with you can make an impact, and appreciate your offer to talk with Van tomorrow. And for David or anyone else who is curious about those kind of talking points to address First Amendment concerns or federalism concerns, in our resource library, Jim Rubens has been kind enough to share text of testimony that he has given. And Jim Rubens is a former Republican state senator from New Hampshire, also ran for I think U.S. Senator in New Hampshire, and it is actually precisely because of those things that he supports this amendment. The federalism point for sure. In Citizens United, the Supreme Court was actually telling states what they could not do, and some of the reddest states, Montana, was the state with the most laws that were struck down. And you can also make the point that in this era, all of our elections are nationalized, and money pours in from out of state. So thank you, David, for that great question, and Representative Deutsch for your answer and offered to talk with Van. It's very exciting.
Sure.
Next up, very excited to call on someone who was actually at the hearing, Carol Ortenzo. If you could let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question is.
Hi, I'm Carol, and I'm calling in from McMurray, Pennsylvania, and Congressman Deutsch, again, I was so fortunate to be able to make that hearing. I was actually in D.C. for something else and was able to stay an extra night. And if you say McMurray, Pennsylvania to Congressman Reschenthaler, his ears will perk up because that is, in fact, where he lives. I'm about a mile from his home, and as you know, he is on that subcommittee, although I was disappointed that he did not show up. In fact, I was stunned at how few Republicans showed up for that hearing, and there was a round robin of who was taking the seat of the minority leader. But I have a two-part question, or two questions, actually. So the first is that if I understood it correctly, part of the argument against this bill by the minority leader is that the corporate contributions are such a small amount of the entire amount of money that is raised for any given campaign that inconsequential, essentially. And I really want to hear a response to that. It seems to us that that's in fact not the case, but if I understood him correctly, that was at least part of the argument that, again, this is such a small percentage overall. Why are we even talking about this? And secondly, I would like to know when the bill will be voted on. There are several local groups of people who would be happy to start storming Congressman Reschenthaler's phone lines and sending in emails asking for support of this bill, but it's always good to give people a suspense date. Otherwise, it's just kind of hanging out there. But if you say, we need you or want you to call or email by X date, then people will respond, I think, more effectively that way.
Great. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for being there. Just a couple of things to your second point to the question. I certainly will let everyone know when there's a vote, and we would like everyone to reach out to all of the members and encourage them to vote for it. In the meantime, though, I would schedule meetings with the congressman. Again, guys, and I don't have close relationships with every member of Congress, but Van I've gotten to know. Guy, just coincidentally, I've also gotten to know. Obviously, spending as much time together as we did during impeachment, I'm going to tell him also that I talked to one of his neighbors, which is even better. And I'll lay some of this out there, but you should schedule a meeting to go talk to him about this. I think it's just important that he hears from it. To the issue about corporations, I mean, it's true that public corporations haven't spent that much, but and they have, public corporations especially have image concerns. They don't want to get involved directly. A lot of them tend to get involved in smaller ways through their political action committees, but there are corporations, private corporations, and wealthy individuals who have funneled billions of dollars through nonprofit groups that don't have to disclose, through these dark money groups that also contribute to the challenges that we have. You can't ignore the fact that billions of dollars have come into our elections because there are some big corporations who have chosen not to engage in the corruption. That's just not a good argument. Well, yes, we know that lots of people are doing this. We know that it's corrupted the system, but gee, there aren't that many of the Fortune 100 companies who are doing it, and so therefore this isn't really a problem. That's just not. It doesn't pass the straight face test, and I think that's. I mean, you hit it back with the fact that we know what the impact of all this money has done. So I will look for Guy also. And Kimberly, I apologize. I know I said I was going to be on until 8:40. I actually am standing outside. I apologize for the car noise for an 8 o'clock dinner that I need to get in and give a quick talk to. They're not as important as you in American Promise, but I still need to hop off.
Absolutely, we totally understand. We want to make sure that you stay well fed and keep fighting the good fight. So
it's
no
just
worries
for the talk.
all.
It's not. It is a good group of like-minded folks. I feel confident telling you that. So I will fill them in. I think all of them as I look in the window from the freezing cold Washington. I think all of them are already co-sponsors, and so I'm really, really grateful for the chance to do this, and I look forward to working with all of you. I also feel compelled, as I told you, that to restate that I'm going into dinner to give a talk. This is not a fundraiser, and there are no super PACs or rich people here. It's funny that we've come to this point to require those sorts of disclosures, but I I felt that was probably appropriate. I'm so grateful for what you're doing. We'll keep you posted on all of our efforts. We'll keep you posted on upcoming votes. You should feel free to reach out with suggestions and the kinds of questions that you've asked of people who might need direct talking to from me, just to bolster the arguments that you're making at home. And I'll look forward, hopefully, to having a chance to welcoming all of you in Washington or getting together again on the phone sometime soon. So, Kimberly, thanks so much, and thanks to all of you.
Congressman Deutsch, thanks so much to you. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Well, guys, for those of you who did get questions in, I think very productive and excited that Congressman Deutsch is going to be following up with a few of our representatives. Fortunately, we do still have our very own Azer Cole and Carol Ortenzo on the line who are at the hearing, so we can continue to take questions if you have questions about the hearing. And actually, I did want to follow up on the question that was just asked, so the point about, if the argument is made that contributions from corporations are such a small part that it shouldn't matter. And as Congressman Deutsch was saying, we actually don't know that that's the case, because it's just so easy to hide how you make donations. And, so in terms of how much, there's perhaps it's a small amount that corporations are publicly donating, but, in terms of how much they donate to a charity that then, is able to donate to a politician without disclosing its donors, it's quite possible that corporations are still having a large influence. And the reason that any size of a window is very dangerous, and I think this is an argument that would resonate with a lot of Republicans, hopefully a lot of people across the aisle, is that window of allowing corporations to donate is what allows foreigners to influence our elections. So that is how people in another country can incorporate themselves as a U.S. corporation and then legally influence our elections. So my 2 cents on how I might answer that. But as I said, we do still have people on the line who are able to answer some questions, and so I will continue calling on a few people. Judy Butler, if you could let everyone know where you are calling in from and what your question is.
Yeah, hi. I'm calling in from Delaware, and I all night Saturday night I watched that hearing, and I kept waiting for a vote at the end, and I couldn't understand where do they go from there. I mean, I couldn't figure out whether it was just an exercise and whether it was a futile exercise.
A perfect question, a great question. Azer, do you want to take that one? Is our maybe last topic before we move on?
Yeah, happily. And hey, Judy, thanks for the question. I was thinking sort of the same thing, and afterwards asked that exact question to Congressman Deutsch's legislative assistant, Joel Richards, who said, you know what, sometimes there's a vote right away. Sometimes there's, another similar hearing. It just depends, and it's really up to the committee chair. In this case, that's Steve Cohen, a Democrat from Tennessee, who really is a champion of this. And my guess it's, sort of his calculation to think, well, when is this the best time to put it to a vote? There's a majority of Democrats on the subcommittee that would probably vote yes. I think he understands the importance of, this needs to be cross-partisan if we want to have a realistic chance of getting to 2/3 in the House and the Senate. And so my guess is, the more we can show that there's Republican support, the more likely they are to want to put it to a hearing quicker. The short answer is I don't know 100%, but we're in really close contact with Deutsch's office in particular, and they're going to keep us in the loop.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Azer, and thank you, Judy, for that question. I think a great question that, to round out our discussion of the hearing, what to look forward to next. And what to look forward to next on this call is our monthly review of progress toward our national goals. As we do each month, we'll review how the work that all of you are doing in your states is coming together. Our ultimate goal, of course, is a constitutional amendment, which will first require proposal by either 34 states calling for a constitutional convention or 2/3 of Congress passing a bill. Right now, 5 states have called for a constitutional convention, and in Congress, 42 of 67 senators and 212 of the necessary 290 representatives co-sponsor bills that propose this amendment. The second necessary step will be for 38 states to ratify the amendment. In addition to the 5 states calling for a convention, another 15 have passed resolutions calling on Congress for this amendment. So we're at 20 of 30 states that are, quote, ready to ratify. And to continue adding to these numbers, it is our job to make it good politics for even more elected officials to support this amendment. And the way we do that is by first writing media that raises awareness in our communities about the issue of big money and the solution of a constitutional amendment. Secondly, holding outreach events to collect support from our communities. And then third, having meetings with our elected officials where we bring our letters and our signatures to make the case that it is good politics to support this amendment. And then we go back to the beginning and we actually make it good politics by publishing media pieces and holding community outreach events where we tell people about the status of those meetings with elected officials so that when it comes time for them to go into the voting booth, they know where their elected officials and candidates stand. And to review our progress on those 3 fronts, media pieces, community outreach, and meetings with elected officials, year to date, we have our network nationally has published 25 media pieces, held 17 community outreach events, and held 39 meetings with elected officials. And to give credit where credit is due on the media pieces front, a breakdown of where those 25 media pieces have come from. There was a letter published in Boston by Rob Eberts, from Long Valley, New Jersey by Heather Santos, from West Metro, Minnesota by Sally Johnson, in the Kansas City region by Edward Acosta, in Santa Fe by Ashwari Solohub, in Delaware by Frederick Alexander, in North Texas, 2 letters published by Joan Ridley, 2 letters published in North Texas, one by Joan Ridley and one by Ruth Bradley Klein, 3 in Northern Virginia from Sally Ridgway and Nancy Morgan, 3 in Gainesville, all from Sandy Clements, 4 in Wyoming from Ken Chestek, and 7 in Port Clinton, Ohio, a combo of Ellen Green Bush, Nancy Gurney, Carol Martin, and Kate Rivet. Again, giving credit where credit is due, and also, in case anyone on this call knows that they have had media published sometime this year and did not hear your name, it's a cue to you. Make sure that you go on to AmericanPromise.net and go to our resources tab to report media pieces you've had published. Likewise, community events, given credit where it's due. 7 of the 17 events we've had this year, 7 of those have been held by the North Texas chapter, 4 by Northern Virginia, 3 by Grand Traverse, Michigan, 1 by Ann Arbor, Michigan, 1 by Santa Fe, New Mexico, and 1 by Knoxville, Tennessee. And last but certainly not least, give a quick recap of our meetings with elected officials. There's been 1 in Port Clinton, Ohio, 2 reported by Ann Arbor, Michigan, 4 reported by Santa Fe, New Mexico, 4 reported by Traverse City, Michigan, 4 reported by Richardson, Texas. I'm guessing at least a few of those were Van Taylor and done by David Stringfellow, who we heard from earlier, 6 in Dallas, Texas, and 17 meetings with elected officials from Grapevine, Texas. To everyone who is behind the work on those, thank you very much. And again, to everyone on this call, thank you for the time that you're taking to be on this call and the work that I know you're doing. And if you know that you've been doing work that I didn't just recap, please be sure to go on to our website, AmericanPromise.net, and go to the resources tab and scroll down just a little ways to use the reporting forms, to make sure that the impact of your action is felt, both politically and inspirationally across our national movement. And, to really get ideas and inspiration from these victories, as we do each month, we have a grassroots victory to share experience from the field. Also, based on feedback from you all, we're actually going to add Q&A to the Grassroots Victory section this month. So just like with our guest speaker, after we hear from our Grassroots Victory, you'll have the chance to press 1 on your keypad and ask a question of your fellow advocate and maybe get some very concrete tips and tricks. And the Grassroots Victory this month is Conrad Zoomhagen in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The group in Ann Arbor actually predates American Promise, known as Reclaim Our American Democracy, or ROAD. So today they retain that identity as well as being part of American Promise. And Conrad is here to tell us about how they worked with the other AP chapters in Michigan to execute a successful lobby day in Lansing, applying some of the ideas from last month's national call along the way. And with that, Conrad, I'm going to take you off mute. Take it away.
Hello, this is Conrad Zoomhagen, and pleased to be here with all of you. As I think all of us know, January 21st, 2020 was the dubious 10th anniversary of the questionable Citizens United, so we at ROAD thought it would be rude not to do something about that. Therefore, we invited other AP members from Grand Traverse and Lansing to join with us to have a lobby day, moneyless of course, at our state capitol in Lansing, Michigan. So we, real citizens, united, ironically, and so we went to Lansing. We had 17 meetings with legislators, both senators and representatives, Democrats and Republicans, as well as with the new executive director of the Michigan Campaign Finance Network. They follow the money, and they're good, and a reporter from mlive.com that covers Michigan. So we presented materials that from AP, for instance, the graphic document that says the far majority of voters from all politicians, 75% of Americans, 85% of Democrats, 70% of independents, support the 28th Amendment. And that was an attention getter. When we called or wrote, we said, give them a reason to meet with us. And the reason is your constituents are for what we're for. And that seemingly worked because we were able to get good meetings, and the purpose and the central focus was to get big and dark money out of our politics. We brought a draft resolution in support of campaign finance reform, similar to the one we got passed unanimously in our own Washtenaw County back in September, and other related materials from AP and our organizations. But we didn't just pitch. We asked questions. We engaged them in a constructive dialogue with each legislator and getting their ideas on how we can improve the current situation. And we also, like Representative Deutsch mentioned, asked them how they feel about the time they spend raising money. Now, on the state level, they acknowledge that they don't spend anywhere near the time they do, but all agreed that big money is an issue one way or the other. So we asked them to take whatever action is possible to do something about that, and of course went to the 28th Amendment and a Michigan resolution. We did get the American Promise Pledge signed by several legislators who we hadn't gotten signed before, including Julie Brixey, Representative Donald Lisinski, our local friend, and previously, by the way, our Congressional federal representative, Debbie Dingell, had signed it, as have others. So we took notes at all the meetings. We brought at least two people to each meeting, one to present, one to take notes, and watch body language. So we wrote thank you and follow-up letters to each legislator, thanking them for their time and interest, and again, asking them to take specific actions. We also got a few thank you letters back, which was nice. In short, it was a good day. We citizens actually united. We engaged the legislators we elected and encouraged them nicely, but to do their jobs for us, we the people. By making donations transparent, by making lobbies transparent, that came up. Sometimes they don't know who the lobbyist is working for. To reform campaign finance for the better. Our efforts were welcomed and appreciated, and we found that taking action works. And we were also encouraged by the fact that we found that we had intelligent, articulate, and dedicated legislators in our state government. As a result, we made a difference that day. We're not done. We're just getting started. That's my pitch. Any questions?
Awesome, Conrad. making good on the words Citizens United. I didn't think I'd seen the day. That was awesome.
Not? It's only fair.
Indeed. Well done, sir. As promised, if anyone has a question for Conrad, you can press 1 on your keypad. And as you're thinking about a question you'd like to ask, you might find it helpful to remember that this month's bonus action is to request a meeting with your U.S. representative in one of the upcoming in-district work periods. We'll talk more about that later. But if you imagine meeting with your U.S. rep in one of those periods, do any questions come to mind for Conrad, who just had 17 successful meetings with elected officials on both sides of the party aisle, or in regard to any of your own state work? And as with Representative Deutsch, I'll get things going with a question, Conrad, because I think I was, privy to this, the email preparation that went into this lobby day. I'm pretty sure that you guys worked to get meetings with some Michigan legislators that, you didn't necessarily have constituents who I think you initially knew were planning to attend the lobby day, but you did some outreach to other Michiganders to help, ask if they would help you set up meetings. Is that right? And, was that important, successful? Could you give us any insight there?
Yes. Well, one, it's always better, and you get more attention if you have at least one member of your group that is actually a constituent with the target representative. That said, we also asked our friendly representatives to recommend those that needed convincing more, other people on either side of the fence or free speech people, and we met with them, particularly a Republican on the west side who was Mr. Free Speech and First Amendment and don't want a lot of regulations. So it was important to us to get the proverbial other side, at least, to agree that, yes, we have a problem and big money is a problem on some level. We targeted people, and we didn't always have a constituent, but we tried to and successfully related to the ones that we weren't the constituents for, that this is important to them. In fact, we asked them, what's important to you about this? Does big money affect you? The thing we did that I think you would understand, Kimberly, you got a smile out of it, is we took a tip from Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern on the last AP conference call where he was a guest, and we specifically told them we were not asking them to change their position on any other issue, but we were only here to talk about this one. You can have your position whatever you like. We're not here to argue that or even discuss it. But big money is a problem for all of us, and whether we're your constituents or not, the data says that the majority of your constituents give a darn about this, and so you might want to care, and they did.
Awesome. Well, and thank you for sharing what use you got out of the last national call. Indeed, does bring a smile to my face. As does the next person that I'm going to call on for a question. We've got Tony Clinch. This is actually my dad. Dad, you're off mute if you want to let everyone know where you're calling in from and what your question for Conrad is.
Hey, I'm just wondering, do I have the technology worked out? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm calling in from Naples, Florida, and I appreciate your comments about this. I mean, there's the talk that there's big money out there, and I believe it could be restated that there's just too much being spent on elections in general. There's talk, there isn't talk about the lack of transparency. I think one of the problems that we see in this is that there's a lot of money being spent by a few groups, and I think at times people say it's all corporations, and I'm not convinced it's all corporations. But it's not transparent that when there's talk being made of exactly who is making the talk. And I think the third consequence of this is that we end up with an imbalanced set of input to the electorate. I'm just curious what your reaction is to those three comments. There's too much being spent, it's not transparent what's being done, and it blocks the balance.
Well, I certainly agree with you, but perhaps more important here is what we learned from the legislators we talked to. Because now we're on the state level, and some of the representatives represent hundreds or thousands of people, not hundreds of thousands or millions. And it was brought home very clearly to us by one such representative who said, you know, in my area, it's not a matter of having to raise huge amounts of money, but the difference between me and the other guy running for this office is I'm getting small donations from hundreds of people, and he or she is getting 2 or 3 big donations from 2 or 3 people. And so that's not exactly representative democracy, and that hit home. As regards transparency, virtually every one of them said that on some level, whether it be the span of, you know, a local thing or a lobbyist disclosing who they're working for all the way to the big bucks in Washington, they said transparency or the lack thereof is a fundamental issue, and disclosure is something we can do something about by passing rules and laws, like passing a rule that a lobbyist who takes us to lunch and doesn't spend a lot of money at least must disclose who his clients are, given that so many are agencies, like big ad agencies, that are multi-client. So I think the term disclosure, being the sunlight on lack of transparency, was a very, very common factor that almost everyone mentioned and almost everyone felt they could do something about. We think that's a good start.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. And last, I will call on Jack Wyatt. Jack, you are off mute if you want to let everyone know.
Jack is our road chair, so go, Jack.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Something that I didn't hear, and I think is important, is that what we did for Lobby Day was a state effort. We had 3 different groups from around the state, one from the southeast side, one from the middle of the state, and one from the northern western portion of Michigan. We had folks in from the name of their group is Grand Traverse American Promise. We had a group in from Lansing, which is Michigan for transparent elections, and Road. We worked together. We made plans with Azor and Kimberly prior to going, and appreciated the support that we got from Kimberly and Azor. They gave us a lot of freedom to decide what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. We just kept in touch with them, and we put together a plan. And the benefit is, hey, there's 3 groups in Michigan that cooperated together, and I think we had an impact. That's what I have to say. Thanks.
Once again, Citizens United.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Jack. And I will give Conrad credit. I think he did start off his story with sharing credit with everyone, but I think that is a fantastic note. Citizens United in a good way to end our grassroots victory. So thank you again, Conrad, for sharing.
You're welcome.
And with that, we'll move on to the last portion of our call. We'll review the suggested action and bonus action of the month. An action sheet with details was attached to the email reminders for this call and will be sent out again in tomorrow's recap. But I like to finish off our calls by transitioning everyone from listening mode into taking action mode, active thinking mode, while we're all together and motivated. So whether you have that action sheet in front of you or not, I'm going to do my best to get you going. First up, our action of the month is to write a letter to the editor, or LTE, about last week's congressional hearing on a constitutional amendment to limit big money. Letters like this are important because we double our victories when we spread word of them and make it good politics to support this amendment. To help get you thinking, I'm going to review key things that you might want to include in your letters by asking questions. Okay, all right, everyone, that's your cue. You're getting ready to press 1 on your keypad, doing some finger stretching, getting the gears turning. All right, to start off your letters, consider what's on your audience's minds. For most news followers, that's probably impeachment and the presidential primary. So I'm looking for ideas for how to pivot from those topics or a hot topic in your city or state. Pivot from that toward the issue of big money and the congressional hearing in a cross-partisan way. Anyone have any thoughts? All right, I see Jack Wyatt again. My man Jack. Any thoughts on how you might pivot from the hot topic in national news or your news in Ann Arbor, Michigan, toward big money in the congressional hearing last week?
No, I'm sorry. That was a mistake. I had hit the button twice, so I'll just get off the phone and let somebody else that has a genuine question go ahead and ask.
All right. Well, I'll let you off the hook. Okay, so again, looking for someone who has an idea of how they might start off their letter to the editor, and pivot from the news that's in today's headlines, national news that's probably impeachment and the presidential primary. How might we pivot from that toward the topic of big money in the congressional hearing in a cross-partisan way? And I see PJ Scalzo. You are off mute. What's your thought on how you might do that?
I am at a loss. I have been sitting here listening to everything, and I am thoroughly confused as to how any of us are going to accomplish anything in today's politics.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I think we heard a lot of positive things. And hopefully, if you want any tips, please feel free to follow up. But Ashwari, I see you've also got your hand up. Ashwari, any ideas on how you might pivot to start off your letter?
Yeah, hi there. So I would perhaps, along the lines of your suggestion, I might even pose a question, which I've done before, and I think it actually catches people's attention. And the question might be something like, are you tired of the negative, painful news about the impeachment and the way that the primaries are starting off? ? And then say, well, I can tell you about something positive that's actually going on, and then talk about the hearing.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you, Ashwari. I love it. All right, so you've pivoted. Great opener. All right, so next up, might want to review some key facts about the hearing. Does anyone remember what committee this congressional hearing was in? Press 1 on your keypad. All right, Monica, this might have been from a second before, but we'll see. I'll call on you. Monica, do you know what congressional hearing House committee last week's congressional hearing was in?
It was the Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Liberties.
Boom, extra credit. Yes, exactly. All right. So, we've pivoted, had that great opener question. Are you tired of the negative news? I can tell you something positive. And the positive thing is there was a hearing, and we know which committee it's in. It's in the Judiciary Committee, Subcommittee Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. And you might also throw in that Congressman Ted Deutsch was there, which I bring up because publicly showing appreciation for our elected officials who are champions helps us convince more politicians to become champions. And you might also throw out that this is a constitutional amendment with cross-partisan support. Does anyone remember what percent of Americans, maybe even what percent of Republicans and independents support this amendment? Press 1 on your keypad if you've got an idea. What percent of Americans? All right. David Stringfellow, do you know what percent of Americans support this constitutional amendment?
Well, 75% of Americans, but 66% of Republicans.
Boom. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. All right. We're coming up on the hour, so I think that's a good recap of, the bones of a letter to the editor, an opener, and then introducing this topic of the congressional hearing that was in the Judiciary Committee, an appeal that this is a movement that's cross-partisan, 75% of Americans, 66% of Republicans, and then definitely want to be sure to finish off your letters to the editor with a call to action and, a way for readers to get involved, because chances are that this is something they do support. So be sure to let them know AmericanPromise.net. for your own point of contact or an upcoming event for your chapter. And last but not least, want to review our bonus action of the month, which is to request a meeting with your U.S. representative in one of the upcoming in-district work periods. Next week is one such in-district work period, as well as March 16th to 20th and April 6th to 17th. So that's 1 week next week, 1 week in March, and 2 weeks in April. Your U.S. representative should be in district. So I hope that you guys will use the opportunity to meet them personally and tell them about this congressional hearing and your local chapter. And with that, we have reached the hour, which unfortunately means it's time for us to say goodbye until next month, but I will take everyone off mute so that we can all say goodnight to one another before we part ways. Good night, everyone, and good luck in the next month.
Good night.
Good night.